The $200 bill slid across the steel desk, but the $1 discount was what made Victoria Rains laugh. $199, she said, holding Daniel Mercer's invoice by one corner as if it had come off the shop floor. Behind her glass office wall, 12 mechanics and drivers could see everything. You expect me to pay this because you looked at a brass fitting and got nervous? Daniel stood beside a gray air brake line he had removed from truck 214. He was 58, broad through the shoulders, with silver at his temples, and black grease worked permanently into the creases of his hands. On the tube, a narrow red paint mark sat 1/8 of an inch from the fitting's collar. "I expect you to park the trucks carrying this part until we know why the line is moving," he said. Victoria tossed the invoice back. It struck his chest and fell between his boots. "You invented a fleet-wide defect to sell me fleet-wide work." At the side counter, Daniel's 19-year-old daughter, Grace, stopped sorting inspection photographs. She did not argue. She enlarged one image, then another, until the tiny laser marks on 3 brass collars filled her screen. Daniel connected the removed assembly to a shop air hose. The gauge climbed through 90, 100, then 120 pounds per square inch. He warmed the fitting with a heat gun held well back, never letting the surface pass the temperature he had measured beside the truck's rear axle. The line did not burst. It did something quieter. The red mark moved, only the width of a pencil line, but every mechanic behind the glass saw clean gray tubing appear between the mark and the collar. "That is the second fitting today," Daniel said. "The line is walking out under pressure and heat. I won't sign those trucks roadworthy." Victoria's smile disappeared. "Then you won't work on my property. Turn in your gate badge before you leave." Daniel looked through the glass at 63 blue and silver tractors lined across the Rains Regional Freight Terminal. Then he bent, picked up the invoice and said, "A badge is yours. My name on a safety release is mine." By morning, every one of Victoria Rains's drivers would park her fleet. But before that happened, one of those trucks would be ordered onto the road, and the little red mark Daniel had painted on an airline would travel much farther than the width of a pencil. The trouble had begun 43 minutes earlier in Bay 4. Truck 214 was a 5-year-old blue sleeper tractor assigned to Ray Benton, a driver who had hauled freight for Rains Regional for 27 years. He had complained about a sharp hiss behind the cab whenever he applied the brakes after a long run. 2 company mechanics had sprayed soap solution over every connection they could reach. They found no bubbles. The truck passed a stationary pressure loss check twice. Victoria wanted it loaded by noon. Daniel had been called because intermittent brake faults were the kind of work his small garage was known for. He did not start by changing parts. He put his palm on each rear wheel hub, measured the temperatures, then asked Ray to reproduce the exact condition. "Not just warm," Daniel said. "Tell me when you hear it." Ray drove slow laps inside the fenced yard, stopping every few hundred feet until the rear axle and the air system reached the same heat they carried after highway use. Daniel rode in the passenger seat, listening. On the 7th stop, a short metallic cough came from behind them. The secondary air needle twitched down 4 pounds and recovered. Back in Bay 4, Daniel slid beneath the tractor with a lamp. He found a short gray nylon signal line entering a brass 90-degree push-to-connect fitting near the rear relay valve. The fitting looked new. A shop record zip tied to the chassis said it had been installed 6 weeks earlier during a preventive maintenance campaign. Nothing around it was wet. Nothing was cracked. Daniel wiped the tube clean, drew a red witness line at the collar, and asked Ray to make 3 more heated stops. When the truck returned, the mark had shifted outward. That was why Daniel charged only $199. He had not quoted a repair. He had billed for the diagnostic time, documented an unsafe condition, and asked for access to inspect the other trucks that received fittings during the same campaign. It was a small invoice because he wanted the safety question answered before anyone started bargaining over labor. Victoria saw the number differently. Rains Regional Freight had been founded by her father, with 1 used cabover and a borrowed flatbed. Under Victoria, it had grown into a disciplined regional carrier serving grocery warehouses, machine shops, and hospitals across 3 states. She knew the price of fuel by the 10th of a cent and the penalty attached to every late delivery. A costly refrigeration contract was due for renewal in 6 days. The customer's auditors were already watching the company's on-time percentage. In Victoria's mind, an unplanned fleet inspection was not caution. It was a threat wearing coveralls. She had entered Bay 4 while Daniel was demonstrating the movement, demanded a written price, and called him into her office in front of anyone who cared to watch. The public rejection was deliberate. She wanted the mechanics to see that outside vendors did not decide when her equipment moved. When Daniel surrendered his badge, Grace closed the laptop and followed him into the yard. She had grown up in Mercer Fleet Service, first coloring at the parts counter, then labeling photographs and job folders after school. At 19, she was taking community college courses in business systems. She could build a clean record from a messy day, but Daniel had never pretended that made her a brake mechanic. She waited until they reached his service truck. "Dad, those 3 collars have the same code." Daniel set his tool case on the tailgate. "Show me." Grace turned the screen toward him. In the first photograph, from truck 214, the brass collar carried the tiny characters 7K41. In the second, taken from a spare assembly on the company mechanic's bench, the same characters appeared below a shallow tool mark. A third image from truck 306 showed 7K41 again. "The work orders say different mechanics installed them on different days," Grace said. "If the problem was one person not pushing the tube in far enough, why would the lot marks match?" Daniel studied the enlarged images. Grace had found a pattern in the records. That mattered, but a matching code did not yet explain the physical failure. "Good catch," he said. "Now we find out what the code means in metal." He returned to the bay entrance, where Victoria's maintenance supervisor, Pete Larkin, was holding out his hand for the visitor badge. Pete had spent 30 years turning wrenches before accepting a desk. His eyes stayed on the fitting in Daniel's hand. "I can't let you back under a truck," Pete said quietly. "Can you let me have the failed assembly? It was removed under my diagnostic authorization." Pete looked toward the office. "Take it. She'll throw it away if you don't." Daniel handed over the badge. "Do not let them trim the line and push it back in." Pete's jaw tightened. That was the common roadside answer to a loose push fitting. Cut the damaged end square, insert fresh tubing to full depth, pull back to seat it, and check for leaks. With a sound fitting, it was a legitimate repair. With an unknown fitting that was releasing good tube, it could hide the warning long enough to put the truck under a load. "I heard you," Pete said. As Daniel drove out, he saw dispatchers moving among the rows with clipboards. The red out-of-service tag he had tied to truck 214 fluttered under the windshield wiper. Mercer Fleet Service occupied a low cinder block building 9 miles away, beside an old farm supply warehouse. Daniel had bought it 13 years earlier, 2 years after Grace's mother died. It held 3 service bays, 1 alignment pit, a brake lathe older than Grace, and a waiting room with 2 chairs that did not match. The place was not failing, but one bad month could hurt. Rains Regional supplied 38% of its commercial work. Daniel had replaced the motor on his only heavy lift, leaving a $4,800 payment due Friday. Losing Victoria's contract would mean laying off one of the 4 people who trusted him for a paycheck. When he pulled in, his lead mechanic, Sam Holloway, saw the company badge missing from Daniel's shirt and understood that something had gone wrong. "How bad?" Sam asked. "We lost the account." Sam glanced at Grace. "Over $199? Over a brake line that won't stay where it belongs." Daniel carried the assembly to the clean bench. Before cutting anything, he measured the insertion depth. He used a matching piece of tubing to mark the internal tube stop on a known good fitting, then compared it with the witness impressions on the suspect line. The tube had been inserted fully. That weakened Victoria's claim that careless installation was responsible. Next, he examined the gray tube under a magnifying lamp. A sound retaining ring left several evenly spaced bite marks around the circumference when the tube was pulled. This one had made 3 deep crescent marks on one side and barely touched the other. Sam leaned closer. "Call it sitting crooked? Maybe. Or the grab ring was stamped off center." Daniel photographed the marks with a scale beside them. Grace added the image to a folder, but Daniel stopped her before she could type a conclusion. "Write what we can see. 3 heavy impressions between 12 and 4 o'clock. No comparable impressions on the opposite side. Not defective grab ring? Not until we prove it." He built a simple retaining fixture from 2 pieces of angle iron and a clear polycarbonate shield. The fitting screwed into a steel block on one side. 10 inches of the same air brake tubing extended from the other. He inserted it with a depth gauge, pulled back to seat it, and painted a new red line exactly 1/8 of an inch from the collar. The first test was cold. Daniel raised the pressure to 130 pounds per square inch, higher than the truck's normal operating range but within the component's rated test condition. He closed the valve and waited 10 minutes. The gauge held. The witness line did not move. "That is why the yard test missed it," he said. He vented the fixture, reheated the brass to 150 degrees, and placed a small pneumatic vibrator against the steel block. The setup did not imitate every force beneath a tractor, but it could repeat heat, vibration, and pressure without risking a vehicle or a driver. At the 87th pressure cycle, Grace pointed at the red line. It moved. Daniel shut the air off and measured the exposed tube, 36 thousandths of an inch. Small enough to dismiss if a person wanted the truck moving, large enough to prove the grip was changing. He repeated the test with a known good fitting from his own stock. Same tubing, same insertion tool, same heat, same pressure, same vibrator. After 500 cycles, its line had not shifted enough for the caliper to measure. The suspect fitting had shifted another 62 thousandths before Daniel stopped it. He did not smile. Finding the fault meant someone had probably bought more than one. Grace searched the work order photographs she had copied during earlier service calls. The files were mundane: dirty valves, worn hoses, serial plates, torque marks, before and after pictures. Daniel required them because memory was unreliable, and because a photograph could keep an honest disagreement from becoming a dishonest one. She found 9 clear views of recently installed fittings. 7 carried 7K41. 2 lot codes were hidden. Daniel called Pete, not Victoria. How many trucks were included in the airline campaign? Pete lowered his voice. 41 tractors. We replaced elbows and unions around the rear relay circuits, wherever corrosion was starting. Do you still have the shipping cartons? 1 open box in the cage. Same code you're thinking about. Park all 41. Pete let out a tired breath. You know I don't have that authority. Then get Luis Ortega. Send him the photos and tell him I have a repeatable hot cycle failure. Luis was Rain's regional safety manager, a former driver who treated a maintenance tag as a statement, not a suggestion. He was inspecting a satellite terminal 70 miles away. Daniel sent him a short evidence packet. The 3 lot code photographs, measured insertion depth, tube impressions, pressure cycle results, and a request for an immediate hold on affected units. Grace watched the upload bar finish. If we posted the moving line, every driver in the state would see it in an hour. Daniel looked at her over the top of the laptop. And half the people watching would turn it into a fight before one truck got fixed. We send safety evidence to the people responsible for safety. What if they bury it? Then we keep the originals, and we keep telling the truth through the proper door until somebody opens it. He removed the suspect fitting from the fixture and sealed it in a clear evidence bag. Then he opened a second fitting from his own stock and showed Grace how the release collar, O-ring, tube stop, and stainless grab ring nested inside the body. The ring's teeth formed a centered circle. Pulling the tube outward made those teeth bite harder. Air pressure does not push the tube out by itself? Grace asked. It adds force, but the fitting is designed for that. Heat softens the nylon a little. Vibration keeps asking the connection the same question. A good ring answers it the same way every time. He tapped the bag containing 7K41. This one changes its answer. Across town, Victoria was changing the question. Truck 214 still carried Daniel's red tag when the second shift dispatcher called Ray Benton into the office. A refrigerated customer had added an urgent pickup. The empty trailer had to reach a distribution center before midnight, or Rain's Regional would lose priority status for the following week. Ray pointed toward the windshield. Mercer put it out of service. The dispatcher, Nolan Price, turned his monitor so Ray could see a message bearing Victoria's initials. Company maintenance had trimmed and reseated the line. The stationary leak check passed. Truck cleared for yard exit and direct run to customer. Pete sign that? Ray asked. The CEO did. Ray had a mortgage, a wife recovering from knee surgery, and 4 years left before he planned to retire. He also knew what low-air alarms sounded like on a mountain grade. He walked to Bay 4 and found Pete staring at the open parts cage. Tell me this truck is right, Ray said. Pete would not do it. The line is seated. It holds cold. That is all I can tell you. Ray looked at the dark yard beyond the bay. That isn't the same answer. No, Pete said. It isn't. Ray called Victoria. She told him Daniel had manufactured a scare after losing a service invoice. She said the vehicle had passed the company's standard check and that refusing a dispatch without a confirmed defect would be recorded. Ray did not want to be brave. He wanted the people paid to make safety decisions to make one he could trust. The two men who knew the truck best had given him a warning and an incomplete answer. The person with the most power had given him certainty without touching the machine. He chose a narrow compromise. He would move the empty combination only as far as the customer's local yard, avoid the interstate, and stop at the first abnormal sound or gauge movement. It was not the decision Daniel would have wanted. It was the decision of a tired man under pressure. At 10:18 that night, after 17 miles of stop-and-go traffic, the tractor reached a long industrial boulevard. The rear axle was hot. Ray slowed for a red light. When he pressed the brake pedal, a crack like a snapped broom handle came from behind the cab. Air roared into the dark. The secondary needle fell. The red warning lamp came on and the buzzer filled the cab. Ray did not pump the brakes. He downshifted, kept the tractor straight, switched on his flashers, and used the remaining controlled braking while pressure was still available. The empty trailer began to tug unevenly. He guided the rig onto a broad gravel shoulder and stopped before system pressure reached the range where the spring brakes would begin applying on their own. No cars were beside him. No one was hurt. A plastic traffic marker disappeared under the right front tire, and that was the only thing the truck struck. Ray set the parking brakes, shut down, and sat with both hands on the wheel while the last air hissed away. The silence afterward made his arms shake. He climbed down with a flashlight. The gray signal line hung free behind the cab. Daniel's original red mark was gone, because the end had been trimmed. Pete's replacement mark, a short stripe of yellow paint, now sat nearly half an inch from the end of the tube. The fitting was still threaded into the valve. Its collar read 7K41. Ray called Daniel before he called dispatch. Daniel arrived 27 minutes later with Grace in the service truck. He had told her to stay home. She reminded him that she was the only person who knew how the night folder was organized, then climbed into the passenger seat before he could argue further. They found Ray standing behind the guardrail, angry now that the fear had somewhere to go. "I should have left the keys on her desk," he said. Daniel crouched behind the tractor. He photographed the line before touching it, measured the yellow mark's displacement, checked the valve and surrounding connections, and confirmed that the tube end had not split. The fitting had simply released it. "Same failure?" Ray asked. "Same behavior. We will not call it the same internal cause until I open the fitting." Dispatch told Ray to push the tube back in and bring the truck home. Daniel took the phone. "There is no roadside release for this vehicle tonight. You don't work for us anymore," Nolan said. "That does not make the truck safe. We'll send our own mechanic." "Send one. He can inspect it here. If anybody reseats that line and orders Ray to drive, I will record that I advised against it." The company mechanic who arrived was a young man named Curtis Bell. He saw the half-inch of clean tube beyond the yellow mark and did not open his tool bag. "I'm not putting that back on the road," Curtis said. Nolan refused to authorize a heavy tow, saying the call belonged to Victoria. Victoria did not answer. Daniel stood beside the service truck and did the arithmetic. Recovering the tractor and empty refrigerated trailer separately at night would cost more than $1,600. If he waited for company authorization, the rig would remain exposed beside a public road, and Ray would remain responsible for it. Grace knew the garage numbers. "Friday," she said. The lift payment was due Friday. Daniel looked at Ray, then at the loose brake line. "Call Mason Heavy Recovery," he said. "Put it on my account." "Dad." A safe decision that only works when someone else pays for it is not much of a decision. They waited 90 minutes for the recovery trucks. Daniel used the time to inspect the release tube under portable light. Again, 3 deep crescent marks appeared on one side and almost nothing on the other. Grace entered only the observation and measurements. Ray watched them work. "You two always this careful?" he asked. "Only when it matters," Grace said. Daniel gave her a look. "So," she added, "most days." It was after 1 in the morning when the combination reached Mercer Fleet Service. Mason's driver parked the tractor inside Bay 2. Daniel sealed the failed fitting in a second bag. Ray sat at the break room table with a cup of coffee and called 3 other drivers. He did not tell them to strike. He told them exactly what happened. The warning, the line release, the falling pressure, and the message that had cleared a tagged truck without Pete's signature. By 2:10, drivers were calling one another from kitchens, truck stops, and sleeper cabs. They compared unit numbers. Several photographed the brass collars behind their own cabs. The characters 7K41 began appearing on their screens. At the garage, Daniel prepared to open the first fitting. This would destroy it as a usable part, so he documented every surface before placing it in a padded vise. He cut the brass body lengthwise with a fine abrasive wheel, stopping short of the internal steel ring. Then he separated the halves with a small chisel. The O-ring was intact. The tube stop had the correct depth. The release collar was not cracked. The stainless grab ring sat against the bench like a tiny toothed washer. To an untrained eye, it looked normal. Daniel placed it over a machinist's grid and rotated it beneath the magnifier. The inner hole was not centered in the outer stamping. One side carried full teeth. The opposite side had been cut shallow, leaving two teeth barely half their intended length. Under load, the strong side bit into the tube, while the weak side let it tilt and creep. Sam whistled softly. That did not happen during installation. No. Supplier defect? Grace asked. Daniel nodded once. Now we can say it. It was the answer, but not yet enough proof for 41 trucks. A single badly stamped ring could be an isolated defect. Daniel needed samples from different boxes, different trucks, and different installers. He needed a test Victoria could not dismiss as a trick performed in his own shop. At 3:05, Luis Ortega called. He had received the evidence packet after leaving the satellite terminal and was driving back. His authority allowed him to issue a temporary safety hold, but Victoria had already removed his remote access to dispatch after he questioned her decision to clear truck 214. She says this is a maintenance disagreement, Luis said. It stopped being that when the line came out on Industrial Boulevard. Ray all right? Shaken, unhurt. Do you have the part? Sealed, plus the first one opened. Same lot. The internal retaining ring is eccentric. Luis was silent for a moment. Can you prove it in the yard? Daniel looked at the clear shield around his bench fixture. Yes. But not with one fitting. I can get you samples if the drivers park. Do not tell them to park for me. Tell them what the evidence says. They decide whether they drive. At 4:30, the first blue and silver tractor rolled through the Rains terminal gate and stopped in the inspection lane. Its driver, Cheryl Boone, set the brakes, removed her dispatch tablet from its cradle, and placed it on the seat. She left the keys in her pocket. Another tractor arrived 6 minutes later, then two together. Drivers already on the property moved their rigs out of loading positions and into 3 straight rows along the east fence. They did not block the gate. They did not touch freight. They left the fuel pumps, fire lane, and public road clear. Each driver taped a handwritten card inside the windshield. Hold for brake fitting inspection. Some had trucks included in the maintenance campaign. Some did not know. A few drove older units that probably carried different fittings, but they parked anyway until someone could identify which trucks were safe. At 5:12, Victoria arrived in a black sedan and found 38 tractors standing idle beneath the yard lights. She walked into dispatch without removing her coat. Who organized this? Nolan pointed toward Ray, who had returned with Daniel in the service truck. Ray's face was gray with fatigue. No one organized it, he said. We compared unit numbers. Victoria looked past him at the rows. Then, uncompare them. Anyone assigned a cleared truck leaves on schedule. No one moved toward the keys. She raised her voice. A stationary inspection passed. One outside mechanic has turned a fitting into a rumor, and now you are risking every account this company has. Ray placed his phone on the dispatch counter. On the screen was the photograph of the released line and the yellow mark half an inch away. That rumor rode with me last night. Victoria's eyes flicked to the image, then to Daniel. You sent him out to stage this. Grace took one step forward. Daniel stopped her with a small movement of his hand. Truck telematics will show where Ray drove and when pressure fell, Daniel said. The fitting is sealed. Your mechanic witnessed the line before removal. Test all of it. You are not an employee, an officer, or an authorized vendor. Correct. Then get off my property. Daniel reached into his service truck and lifted out the polycarbonate test shield. Give me 12 minutes in the maintenance yard. 6 suspect fittings, 2 controls, 1 calibrated gauge. If every suspect sample holds without measurable movement, I will leave, pay the towing bill, and state in writing that my batch warning was not reproduced. Victoria crossed her arms. And if one moves? Every truck with an unidentified 7K41 fitting stays parked until it is replaced and tested. The drivers heard the terms. So did Pete, Curtis, Sam, and Luis Ortega, who had just entered through the side door. Victoria turned to Luis. You are suspended, pending review. Luis placed his company phone on the counter. "You can suspend my job. You cannot make a failed airline pass." That was the first moment Victoria seemed to understand that the argument had moved beyond Daniel. She could cancel one vendor and remove one manager's access. She could not drive 63 tractors herself. Daylight was beginning to flatten the darkness outside. 49 trucks now stood in the rows. The remaining drivers were calling from the road, asking whether to return empty or hold at safe public lots. Victoria looked at the clock. The first grocery window opened in 80 minutes. 12 minutes, she said. "In my yard. My people choose the samples." "Agreed. And no cameras for publicity." Daniel looked at Grace. "Documentation only. No posting." Grace nodded. The maintenance yard became a test floor. Pete selected 6 unopened fittings from 2 cartons in the locked parts cage, both marked 7K41. To eliminate the claim that Daniel had damaged them, Curtis installed 3 tubes and Pete installed 3 more. Each man used the manufacturer's depth gauge, made square cuts with the proper tool, inserted the tubing fully, and pulled back to seat it. Grace photographed the depth marks and assigned each assembly a number. Daniel supplied 2 control fittings purchased months earlier from a different lot. Pete installed those as well. Sam bolted the 8 assemblies into a steel manifold behind the clear shield. Each tube had an identical free length and a red witness line. A second, narrow black mark sat 1/10 of an inch behind the red one. If red reached black, the movement would be visible from 20 feet away. Daniel connected a calibrated pressure transducer and a mechanical gauge, so the result did not depend on one instrument. A regulator limited the system to 130 pounds. A relief valve opened above that. The clear shield faced the crowd. The open ends and Daniel's hands remained behind steel. He attached 2 heating bands and temperature probes to bring the brass bodies to 150 degrees, the condition that had reproduced the failure without exceeding the documented underbody temperature range. A small pneumatic vibrator clamped to the manifold. The drivers formed a wide semicircle beyond a painted line. No one needed a lecture on what air pressure could do to loose tubing. Victoria stood with Nolan near the bay door. Her phone kept lighting with missed dispatch calls. Daniel held up the open grab ring from the first fitting. He did not pass it around. "This ring came from truck 214's original assembly," he said. "Its hole is stamped off center. Strong teeth on one side, shallow teeth on the other. Our test asks one question. When all fittings receive the same heat, vibration, insertion, and pressure cycles, do the 7K41 samples release the tube, while the control samples hold?" He pointed to the paired marks. "No opinions. Watch the red lines." Victoria said, "Run it." Daniel opened the isolation valve. The manifold filled with a hard rush. Both gauges settled at 130. He checked the shield, called the temperature, and started the vibrator. Then he used a timed valve to cycle pressure between 80 and 130 pounds, reproducing repeated brake applications. At first, nothing happened. That was not comforting to Daniel. Intermittent faults earned their name by behaving when watched. 100 cycles passed. The red marks remained tight to the collars. Nolan gave Victoria a look that said the whole morning might still be blamed on Daniel. At cycle 140, the temperature on sample 4 lagged behind the others. The heating band had loosened when the manifold began vibrating. Daniel stopped the cycle. "Your 12 minutes are running," Victoria said. "Then they run," Daniel replied. He vented the entire manifold before reaching behind the shield. It cost 2 minutes to secure the band and bring the fitting back to temperature. He could have tightened it live with a long tool. Every mechanic there knew that. He refused to create a second hazard while proving the first. Ray folded his arms. One by one, other drivers did the same. Daniel restarted the test from 0 so every sample would receive the same counted cycles. At cycle 212, the red line on sample 2 separated from the brass collar. Grace read the caliper camera. 28 thousandths. The control lines had not moved. At cycle 267, sample 5 began to creep. The tube tilted so slightly that only the unequal red gap revealed it. Pete stepped closer to the boundary line. He had installed sample 5 himself. "Full depth," he said. "I measured it twice." At cycle 319, sample 2's red mark reached the black mark, 1/10 of an inch of travel. The drivers did not cheer. They watched their own trucks sitting beyond the fence and understood that the same movement could be happening where they could not see it. Victoria moved beside Daniel. "Stop. You have shown one bad sample. The agreement was 12 minutes. Continuing will destroy evidence. The sealed road fitting is your evidence. These are test samples. We record the point of release. She reached toward the main power switch. Pete stepped between her and the table. He did not touch her. He simply occupied the space. Let the machine finish answering, he said. Victoria looked past him for support. Nolan stayed beside the door. Louise stood with the drivers. Curtis watched the gauges. The authority she had carried into the office no longer reached the switch. Daniel continued cycling. Sample 1 moved at 384. Sample 6 followed 19 cycles later. The two control assemblies remained fixed, their red lines tight against the collars. At cycle 471, sample 5 released. The gray tube shot backward less than 8 inches before its restraint cable caught it. It struck the inside of the polycarbonate shield with a flat crack. Air hammered the enclosure, the mechanical gauge dropped, and the automatic isolation valve closed. Every driver could see the empty brass collar. Daniel shut the supply, verified zero pressure on both gauges, and waited before opening the shield. Grace's timer read 11 minutes, 38 seconds. 4 of 6 suspect samples had measurable movement. 1 had fully released. The 5th showed no travel. The 6th had moved, but not reached the black mark. Neither control had moved. Daniel laid a straight edge across the results, so the red gaps could be seen together. A safe fitting does not get credit because it held 400 times, he said. It has to hold the next time a driver needs it. Victoria stared at sample 5. The anger in her face had changed. It was no longer the anger of a person being challenged. It was the anger of a person calculating how close her certainty had come to hurting someone. Her phone rang again. She silenced it. How many trucks? She asked. 41 were in the campaign, Pete said. We have not identified every fitting location. How long? Daniel answered. With parts, 4 crews can inspect all 63 tractors today. Anything carrying 7K41 gets replaced. Then we pressure test cold. Bring each truck to operating temperature on the yard loop and recheck the marks. Trucks with other lots still get identified and documented before release. Can you lead it? The question landed in front of the same people who had watched her throw his invoice. Daniel did not make her repeat it. Only if Luis controls safety release, and no dispatcher, overrides a red tag. Victoria looked at Luis. Your suspension is withdrawn. That is not enough, Daniel said. The rule has to remain when today gets expensive. Ray spoke from the driver line, and when a customer calls, Victoria faced the rows of parked tractors. She had built her reputation on never allowing a room to see uncertainty. That habit had served her in bank negotiations and rate fights. In a maintenance yard, it had nearly turned a question into an accident. Safety tags can be cleared only by maintenance and safety together, she said. Dispatch cannot override them. Not me either. Louise held her gaze. Put that in the operating policy before the first truck leaves. I will. Daniel nodded toward the test manifold. Then we work. The parked fleet did not erupt into applause. The reversal came in smaller, harder movements. Drivers carried their keys to Luis instead of Nolan. Pete opened the parts cage to Daniel. Curtis rolled the first tractor into Bay 1 and waited for Daniel's inspection order. Sam called the garage's morning customers and explained that Mercer Fleet Service was closing its bays for an emergency fleet safety response. 3 customers rescheduled. 1 could not. Daniel lost a municipal plow inspection worth $900. He accepted it. The replacement problem arrived 20 minutes later. The terminal stocked only 14 fittings from an older, verified lot. The campaign had used more than 100 elbows and unions. Even if only half were affected, the local inventory would not cover them. Victoria called the distributor. Her tone returned to its old command. Daniel listened long enough to hear her demand immediate delivery, then shook his head. Do not ask them to send anything labeled equivalent, he said. We need traceable air brake fittings from a different lot, sealed cartons, material certificates available. Victoria covered the phone. That adds hours. It also keeps us from replacing an unknown part with another unknown part. For a second, the old argument threatened to return. Then she uncovered the phone and repeated Daniel's requirements exactly. The distributor found stock at 2 branches. A courier would arrive in 3 hours. While they waited, Daniel divided the yard into inspection stations. Each tractor received a numbered sheet. Teams located every replaced elbow and union, cleaned the collar, photographed the lot code, measured visible tube seating, and added a temporary witness mark. Any 7K41 component earned a red tag. Other lots went to a yellow verification lane. Trucks, untouched by the campaign, still received a baseline pressure loss test. Grace ran the image station at a folding table beside the bays. She did not decide which truck passed. She made sure Unit 118's left rear photograph did not end up in Unit 181's folder. The difference mattered. At mid-morning, Victoria approached her with 2 paper cups of coffee. "You are the one who found the common code," she said. Grace accepted a cup but did not soften. "I noticed it in the pictures. Dad proved why it mattered. Still, I should have looked. You should have listened before you looked." Victoria absorbed that without answering. Grace returned to the screen. By noon, the count stood at 37 tractors carrying at least one 7K41 fitting. 4 more campaign trucks used other lots. On 9 7K41 connections, the witness position had already changed enough to expose clean tubing. 2 showed the same one-sided bite marks after removal. The scale of the defect did not make Daniel triumphant. It made him faster. The courier brought sealed cartons at 12:26. Pete and Daniel opened them together, verified the markings, and sacrificed 1 fitting from each lot for a shortened acceptance test. Both held without movement. Only then did installation begin. Crews worked in pairs. 1 mechanic removed and replaced. A second verified tube condition, insertion depth, routing, and torque at threaded connections. No one reused a line end carrying deep tooth damage. Where trimming would leave insufficient slack or create a tight bend, they replaced the full tube run. That choice cost time and material. It also prevented a repair made for the photograph instead of the road. Victoria spent the afternoon calling customers. She did not blame a labor action or an outside vendor. She said the fleet was under a voluntary brake system safety stand-down after a component batch failed a controlled test. Some customers imposed penalties. 1 grocery warehouse moved 2 loads to a competitor. A hospital supplier thanked her for not sending a questionable truck. Near 3 o'clock, a representative from the fitting distributor arrived with a quality engineer. Daniel handed over copies of the test data, but kept the road failure component sealed until Luis completed the company's incident record. The engineer examined the opened ring and asked who found the eccentric stamping. "Daniel did," Grace said before anyone else could answer. The engineer requested unused 7K41 samples, cut 1 open, and found the same shallow teeth. He called his office from the yard. Within an hour, the supplier placed the entire lot on hold and began contacting other buyers. That confirmation mattered, but it did not release a single Rains truck. Daniel kept the crews focused on the machines. The first repaired tractor reached the verification lane at 4:40. It built pressure to Governor Cutout and held through the static loss test. Daniel then rode with Pete around the closed yard loop, making repeated controlled stops until the rear axle area reached the target temperature. Back on the line, they inspected every witness mark. None had shifted. A final service brake application on the company's low-speed test strip stopped the unloaded tractor straight between the marked cones. Luis signed the release. Ray took the keys. Victoria expected him to leave for the freight waiting at the dock. Ray climbed into the cab, checked both air gauges, applied and released the brakes, then climbed down again. "I'll take the first load after Daniel signs the next driver's truck too," he said. "Nobody here is going to be the only one trusting this." The second tractor passed, then the third. The fleet returned to motion slowly, 1 verified machine at a time. By sunset, 18 trucks had green tags. Drivers with urgent medical and food loads volunteered for the first assignments. Non-essential freight remained at the dock. Daniel worked through the night. Grace slept for 2 hours in the service truck with her coat folded under her head, then returned to the image table. Sam forced Daniel to eat half a sandwich while watching a pressure gauge. At 6:15 the next morning, the last affected tractor completed its heated check. 63 units had been identified. 37 had received new fittings. 14 required at least 1 full tube section. Every installed connection carried a photographed lot code and witness mark. No red tag had been cleared by dispatch. Daniel stood beside truck 214 as Ray performed the final brake application. The blue tractor stopped square in the lane. Both air needles remained steady. Behind the cab, the new red marks sat exactly where Daniel had painted them. Luis signed the release and handed Ray the keys. This time, Ray kept them. As engines started across the yard, the sound did not resemble victory music. Diesels coughed. Air dryers purged, and drivers performed ordinary walk-around checks. That was the point. Safety had returned the work to the ordinary. Victoria asked Daniel to meet her in the same glass office where she had rejected his invoice. He remained outside beside the maintenance desk. "Anything we settle can be settled here," he said. The garage crew and several drivers were still close enough to hear. Victoria brought out a folder. On top lay Daniel's original invoice, flattened but still creased where it had struck the floor. "The $199 is approved," she said. "So are your towing cost, emergency labor, materials, and the work your garage lost while responding." Daniel reviewed the numbers. The emergency invoice was substantial but reasonable. Labor at the garage's posted commercial rate, parts with standard markup, recovery at cost, and the canceled plow inspection. There was no punishment fee, and no invented premium for being right. "This line is too high," he said, pointing to 20 duplicate labor hours created when 2 timesheets overlapped. Victoria looked at him in disbelief. "You are correcting an invoice downward after what I did." The hours did not happen twice. Pete laughed once, not at Daniel but from sheer exhaustion. Victoria crossed out the duplicate amount and initialed it. Then she turned to the drivers. "I cleared a truck after a qualified warning because I treated downtime as the greater danger. I was wrong. Ray, I put you in a position no driver should be put in. Daniel, I accused you of inventing work when you were trying to limit it. I am sorry." No one rushed to rescue her from the discomfort. Ray finally said, "Make the new rule last longer than the apology." "It will." She handed Luis a signed policy establishing independent safety release authority and protection for drivers who reported mechanical concerns in good faith. The company would also maintain lot-level records for safety-critical replacement parts. Luis read it before accepting it. Victoria then offered Daniel a 3-year exclusive fleet maintenance contract. He did not take the pen. "Exclusive means I depend on one company enough to stop telling it no," he said. "I will service your fleet under a 1-year agreement. Either side can leave. Safety calls stay independent. My people are paid for inspections whether the answer is repair or no repair." Victoria looked at the corrected invoice, then at the rows of trucks now pulling toward the gate. 1 year, she said. Daniel signed only after Luis and Pete read the safety clauses. The supplier later reimbursed Rains Regional for the defective parts, documented labor, and recovery. Its investigation found a worn stamping die that had drifted during one production run. The company expanded the recall to every fitting carrying 7K41. Because Daniel had kept the road component intact and the test conditions controlled, the supplier did not waste days arguing about whether the failure belonged to installation or manufacturing. The refrigeration customer still charged Rains Regional a late penalty. Victoria paid it. She did not pass it to the drivers or deduct it from maintenance. The renewal meeting was difficult, but the customer kept the contract after reviewing the stand-down and corrective action record. On Friday morning, Daniel made the $4,800 lift payment. The fleet invoice had not cleared yet, so he used money set aside for replacing the garage roof. The roof could wait another month. No employee missed a paycheck. At noon, a plain envelope arrived by courier. Inside was payment for the emergency work and a separate company check made out to Mercer Fleet Service for $199. Victoria had refused to combine it with the larger amount. On the memo line she had written, "Diagnostic invoice, paid in full." Grace pinned a copy above the clean bench, beside the opened grab ring, and the length of gray tube with the red mark. Daniel removed the check copy. "We do not need a trophy for getting paid what we build." "Then what stays?" Grace asked. He considered the small display. He put the check in the office file and returned the defective ring to the board. "That stays. Not because it was bad, because it looked good." Grace added a neat label beneath it. Lot 7K41. Full insertion, failed hot vibration test. Below that, after a moment, she added, "Observe first, conclude after." Daniel read the second line. "That yours? I learned it somewhere." The following Monday, Ray brought truck 214 to Mercer Fleet Service for its first scheduled check under the new agreement. He pulled into Bay 1, set the brakes, and handed Daniel a paper bag containing 2 breakfast sandwiches. "I figured the $199 did not include breakfast," Ray said. Daniel inspected every witness mark behind the cab. None had moved. Grace photographed them for the new lot record. Ray watched her name the files, then looked at the display over the bench. "Funny," he said. "All those trucks parked because of something small enough to lose in your pocket." Daniel turned the brass ring between his fingers. The part was small, the warning wasn't. Outside, the blue tractor idled with both air gauges steady. Grace closed the folder and slid it across the bench. Daniel signed the inspection line, handed it back, and reached for the next wrench.